What would happen if you simply stopped doing so much? Reverend Cameron Trimble, the CEO of the Center for Progressive Renewal, was having her first coaching session with a man named Parker. Parker is the senior minister of a large 500-member growing, thriving church, and a father of 2 children under 6. He had reached out to Trimble because he wanted to he wanted to get into place some ministry initiatives, and he needed a strategy to invite the congregation into participating more fully. Trimble had asked him in their first professional coaching session to tell him more about the church that he served. He got so excited to share the thriving ministries, the growth that was occurring, the fantastic people that were leading the way in community outreach and justice. He talked about the committed youth group going to Guatemala to do amazing work there. He so appreciated and engaged in mutual ministry with a dedicated staff. And he shared the great ministries going on at the church. And yet by the end of the conversation, he was almost in tears. Trimble said, "Tell me what you're feeling in your body right now after all of that." Parker responded, "God, I am so tired. I can't get past it. I'm scared to death that I can't keep up with all of this. I love everything about this church, yet I'm scared it's going to kill me." Trimble asked, "What would happen if you simply stopped doing so much?" Silence on the other end of the phone. Trimble didn't ask this as a hypothetical question. She was asking it for Parker's own survival, who was in active burnout. And she tells us as she engages folks around this nation that she could tell many more such stories. You too have shared those stories with me about trying to work harder and work smarter, our lives filled with the demands of family and work and church and volunteer commitments. Yet Trimble says, "We are working in unhealthy ways in an unhealthy world in the hopes that working smarter is the antidote to working harder." She says, "Can I absolve us of this myth, of this misconception? It doesn't work. Don't bother." Businesswoman Randy Zuckerberg was being interviewed on a panel when the moderator asked that famous work-life balance question. "Randy," he began, "you're a mom and you have a career. How do you balance it all?" She had answered it over 100 times before with all the platitudes about how much help she had, how hard she worked. But this time she was rather frustrated to answer the question one more time. So she finally told the truth. She said, "I don't. In order to set myself up for success," she said, "I know I can only realistically do 3 things well every day. So every day when I wake up, I think to myself, work, sleep, family, friends, fitness, I'd add faith. Pick 3. In these days in which we live, it is an act of self-compassion to let go of the myth of having it all or doing it all or working even more and more or proudly wearing society's badge when we are asked, "How are you?" We say, "Oh, I'm so busy. I'm overwhelmed. I'm barely keeping my head above the water." It's an act of compassion to give ourselves the freedom to pick 3 a day, or maybe just 2, and to make sure we're including rest in that. Compassion. I'm sure you remember two falls ago, not to push fall on us, right? We looked at Karen Armstrong's work, 12 Steps to a Compassionate Life. And we played with this working definition of compassionate. Compassion means to endure something with another person. To put ourselves in somebody else's shoes in order to feel her pain as though it were our own, and to enter generously into his point of view. That's why compassion is called the golden rule. to take a moment to look at our hearts, discover what gives us pain, and then refuse under any circumstances whatsoever to inflict that pain on anybody else, including ourselves. Compassion is that commonality, that interconnectivity of all the major world religions, Judaism, Islam, Christianity. It started back in the Axle Age. Yes, y'all are familiar with that, in the 9th century BCE. When amidst this extreme violence way back then, the seeds were being planted. Karen Armstrong calls it religious sage advance, proto-theological beliefs that would later flower into rabbinic Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. And all of them have at the core this concept of divine compassion. Our ability to have compassion for ourselves. What would it look like? What would it happen if we simply stopped doing so much? I know we move at a pretty fast pace here at church, and I know y'all do in your lives as well. And yet, what would it look like if we simply stopped doing so much? Jesus understood this question and the reality of a fullness of life in His ministry. We hear in the Scriptures that the apostles, which means the sent ones, they've gone out to do the really good work, the healing and the teaching, and they come back to share this with Jesus. Jesus, being the compassionate one that He is, rather than saying, fantastic, let's go do more, says, how about we rest? Come away to a deserted place all by ourselves and rest for a while. For many were coming and going, and they had no leisure even to eat. For some of us, does that sound familiar? Eating at our desks or in another business meeting or driving in between meetings where we eat lunch. Jesus gets it. He's lived that 60 or 70 hour work week, and He invites them to rest. In the midst of the overwhelming need, in fact, the folks knew who Jesus was at this time. So when He's trying to bring His disciples in a boat to a deserted place, all the people gathered to figure out where He was going to get there before Him. There is this intense need, people who wanted their healing and teaching and to have miracles performed, and yet Jesus continued to come back to, we need some time to refuel. We need to rest, to refocus, and act in a way that is compassionate. To tend to that nourishment of mind, body, and spirit. Because as Christians, there is this interplay of compassion and action, of rest and more action, yes? In your lives, what does rest look like for you? What does it feel like in your body to have a rested body? I am aware at how poorly I rest. Can I admit that to y'all? I can ask my family about that too, yes? I'm aware on vacation it takes me 3 to 4 days to downshift, and my rest and challenge is how do I turn off the monkey brain that wants to go from one thing to the... Because I love what I do, y'all. I love the life that I have and the family that I have, but my brain is constantly moving, and that's where Jesus challenges me to rest. To be able to turn all of that off for a few moments and hold Jesus' hand and go on my mental break to the band shell or to the kayak and allow myself to be held in Jesus' everlasting arms of love. Yet what are the barriers for us to rest? What are those mental tapes that kick in when you allow yourself that deep rest, those few moments throughout your day? We can wear ourselves down by those tasks of ministry, by the jobs that we have, by the demands of our family. We can wear ourselves down emotionally, spiritually, and become relationally drained. And Jesus recognizes the need for time away, whether it's physically or just that little mental, emotional, spiritual vacation in our minds, so that we can refuel and reform. Y'all, in the times in which we live, it's a necessity for us to rest. for us to realize that we are in the marathon and not the sprint. That we need to be a people who tend to our very being. Did you notice what happened when Jesus rested? He came back filled with more compassion and empathy for all the needs that were before him. What would happen if you simply stopped doing so much and allowed yourself to rest? Our work and Jesus' work is never completed. Our work of healing is lifelong. Yet God desires for us wellness. God desires for us abundance. So let us be a people who commit to intentionally each day retreating. Daily, weekly, monthly. Being a people who understand that interplay of action and contemplation, work and rest, commitment and retreat become the necessities for a life filled with compassion for ourselves and for one another. Let us be a people who pause and rest and open ourselves to God's sustaining presence. Amen.